Welcome back, everybody. Today we're going to be talking about one of the most anticipated points of discussion that happens every offseason. It's going to be even more interesting this offseason, and that is the quarterback carousel. I have a few guys today I'm going to discuss them, their situations, and where I think they end up going into 2021. And to kick off the list, I think we should get started with one of the most talked about quarterbacks this entire year, and that was Carson Wentz. To get out of the way, I think Carson Wentz stays in Philly, if for no other reason than they get financially hamstrung if they let him go. Philly has the second worst cap situation in the entire league and are over $50 million over the salary cap. That's an insane amount of money to be over. They're only bested by one team, but we'll talk about them later. And if they get rid of Carson Wentz in any way you could imagine, he is an absolutely nuts cap hit. Cutting him prior to June 1st cost them $60 million in dead cap. If they release him after June 1st or trade him, it rounds out to about $34 million in dead cap either way. And very few, if any, destinations can even afford him due to needing $25.4 million in effective cap room to take him on. Effective cap room is just what you will have to use after you fill out the rest of your roster with 51 guys. It's more of a projection. Only 7 teams in the league actually have the effective cap to do this. The Jaguars, who are going to be taking Lawrence, the Jets, who are going to be sticking with Darnold or QB, the Patriots, who I doubt go after him, the Washington football team, who I also doubt go after him, the Bengals, who have Joe Burrow, and the Dolphins, who have Tua Tagovailoa. The most likely suitor here is the Colts, and the Reich connection isn't nonsensical. It does make some sort of sense, but I doubt they want to sacrifice that much of their cap for a guy who's looked this bad and has been on a constant downward slope ever since tearing his ACL, especially when you put a guy like Jalen Hurts in there and he has looked miles better with the same, if not slightly worse, weapons. Getting rid of Doug Peterson at this point is also a sign that they are choosing Wentz over him, and at this rate, it is hard to imagine him being anywhere besides Philadelphia to start the next season. Staying in the NFC East, we're going to be talking about Dak Prescott next, and I'm just going to say it. He will be a Dallas Cowboy in 2021. Rather, he is on his extension that he's wanted or the franchise tag. But if I'm Dallas, I'm going to be pushing for an extension, and here's why. Not only is the franchise tag this year almost $38 million, about a $7 million increase, quarterback pay is one of those things that every year just continues to shoot up. Patrick Mahomes reset the market with a $500 million extension, and the extension that is looming for Josh Allen in Buffalo could very well surpass that and probably push $600 million. And 10 years, it's about what Mahomes would sign, I think. Even if you don't think Dak is worth anywhere near that, which I think most people would agree, it's still going to push up his asking price and then his market value. The thing is that quarterback money is just that. The guy might not be worth it, but depending on what other guys around him are getting paid, if you want to lock up your guy, you're going to have to overpay. Vikings did it with Cousins first. It happened with Mahomes. It's going to continue happening around the league. He wants 4 years on the extension. Dallas wants 5. And at this point, I'd venture to guess he wants about $40 million a year. Coming off an injury, though, I wouldn't blame Dallas for not wanting to extend him this year, but I feel like that's a very short-sighted way to look at this situation. Next year, the franchise tag, if they choose to put it on him again, will be $52 million. And if he balls out next year on his way back from injury and keeps up anywhere near the same pace he was keeping up this year, he is going to demand a shit ton of money, especially if Allen gets the extension that I and a lot of other people think he will. I wouldn't be shocked if he demands around $50 million a year. So if I'm the Cowboys, I just cut my losses, realize that I might have to overpay for a guy who might not be the exact same, although I don't think there will be any hiccups in him coming back. It's better to pay what he wants now, 4 years, 5 years, $40 million, than get caught with either an unstomachable franchise tag bill or a contract extension that is over a 20% increase on what he was asking for annually before. On to a more boring guy, it's Phillip Rivers, and I just think Phillip Rivers is done. There's nothing wrong with that. He was mediocre this year and just doesn't have the ability to be that guy at quarterback. He was never an elite guy, like put his team on the back, but he just doesn't have that talent anymore. He's the type of quarterback teams are moving away from. He's an absolute statue, not to mention that he mentioned prior to the Colts game against the Bills that this year might just be his last. They're not going to want to bring him back because he's just not that great anymore, and because he's probably going to want around another 20 to 30 million for a year. He's a statue. He passes a lot to the running back, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's just trending away from what the league is moving towards in general, which is a heavier reliance on passing to receivers. It was honestly a good run if he decides to hang it up. Could I see him signing somewhere on like a mentor deal? Possibly. I think it's highly unlikely. I think at this point it's time for Philip Rivers to just hang it up, call it a career, and go spend time with his 30 children. Now it's time to talk about the bearded backup, one of the most electrifying number 2 quarterbacks in history, maybe the most electrifying number 2, Ryan Fitzpatrick. He is so hard to call for me just because he can land pretty much anywhere because of the purpose he serves. You need a stopgap at number 2 for your young guy, bring him in. Have someone that's coming off an injury and you need someone to slot in for a few weeks, bring him in. That's why I think he would make sense in Cincy if Joe Burrow isn't ready for week 1. Or at Los Angeles to back up Justin Herbert to get rid of Tyrod Taylor because you don't need him. But one spot that interests me, and it might not be the most likely spot, but I just think it's a bit more fun to talk about where he could go, is the New Orleans Saints. It's honestly incredibly likely at this point that, spoiler, Drew Brees retires. The writing is on the wall that he's going to retire and take a broadcasting deal. And I don't know if they hang on to Winston because they have him on a $1 million contract. And a guy his age with the football talent he's shown is going to want to prove a deal somewhere, and I think he might get it, but I'm not sure he gets a ton of money. Either way, I don't think the Saints give him what he is looking for. They're $90 million over the cap, and they're always over every year. They somehow make it work, but it is still the worst cap situation in the league. There's no other way to put it. And they could make it work, but I do think they need a guy that's somewhat reliable in case the Taysom Hill experiment fails. I think they like Hill as the guy. It's super hard to tell, though. I think them not even giving Winston a blink kind of shows that they trust Hill at least more than the other guy on their roster. But I think considering the contract they have him on, he's going to be their quarterback. So you have a backup plan in Fitzpatrick, who is a very smart veteran. He's a fun-ass gunslinger. He can pick up the offense in case Hill falters. Or if they want to use Hill in like a half quarterback, half Swiss Army knife type of player, they can have Fitzpatrick be the quarterback there while Hill rolls out at tight end, running back, slot receiver, wherever the hell. I think the more likely option here is that Hill is the 1 and they bring in Fitzpatrick as a nice backup plan as the 2. It's never a bad idea to have a guy like this backing up your roster. He can probably push the ball farther downfield than Hill and Brees combined at this point. And honestly, trying to predict where Ryan Fitzpatrick is going to go is an absolute shit shoot every year. But I feel like Nola is an interesting place that not a lot of people are talking about, that can kind of offset any of the potential damages this offense takes because of the Taysom Hill experiment. This, to me, is the most interesting case out of any quarterback here because I only see 2 true options for this guy, and it's Sam Darnold. And these options, to me, specifically one, make a ton of sense. He either stays with the Jets, who just hired Robert Saleh and are bringing in LaFleur, the passing coordinator, to be his OC, which I think knocks the Jets out of contention to keep him. I think they might want to move towards a guy like Trey Lance at number 2, who a lot of people were linking to San Fran in the draft because of the play style, but mobile, accurate, can put in a dime. But staying with the Jets is still an option for Darnold. They could take Sewell at 2, they could take a receiver to give him more talent. Or he goes to what might be my favorite landing spot for any quarterback this offseason, the Indianapolis Colts. Now, Darnold, through his first 3 years, hasn't looked great, but he certainly hasn't looked terrible. He's been playing under Adam Gase, who is notorious for being dog shit and having players improve when they leave, with no offensive weapons. And back to that Gase thing, I think Darnold owes Ryan Tannehill a lot of credit for the market he is going to have this next offseason. Tannehill flipped the script and really became the poster child. I think he was the only quarterback after Gase. But he really showed what a quarterback outside of Gase with a competent offensive system could do. He had flashes with Gase, but he was never truly unlocked until he went to Tennessee with Mike Vrabel. I think that the same thing can happen here. Darnold was going to have a market after this year, regardless of if Tannehill did well after Gase, but I think it's even stronger now because of that. He hasn't looked great, I'll be honest. He's looked very bad before they took him, but he has made some really nice plays, and the playmaking ability, the ability to roll out, get out of a sack, and put a ball on an absolute dime down the field, it's still there. Those traits they saw at him when they took in number 2 didn't go away just because he had horrible talent and coaching around him. When you have a quarterback on a rookie deal as well, it is the single most helpful thing to have when building a team. You get the most important position on the team, bar none, on a very affordable contract. And when you take that and you mix that with a team in the Indianapolis Colts, who have $66 million in effective cap, the third most in the entire league, who are also coming off a playoff berth. Darnold makes a ton of sense financially. They pick him up, he would cost them around $10 million, bringing them to about 56 in effective cap room, and they'd have his fifth-year option, so they can evaluate him. I think they might have to pick it up before the season, so they'd probably pick it up. They have 2 years of a guy who's still only 24, and they'll have plenty of time to evaluate him and bring in a secondary guy if they so feel. But back to the financials, they'd have $56 million. And this is a great wide receiver offseason, and one thing the Colts are desperately needing is a number one wide receiver. So instead of a guy like Wentz, who a ton of people are projecting to go here, you bring in a guy like Darnold, you have almost $60 million in effective cap still left. You can bring in a guy like Allen Robinson, Will Fuller, Chris Godwin, and still have a decent bit of cap left. Darnold will be surrounded with what might be one of the better situations for any young quarterback in the entire league, with Frank Reich and the coaching staff, an elite O-line, a great young running back in Jonathan Taylor, a decent receiving core at that point that would potentially have a guy like Allen Robinson or Chris Godwin, Michael Pittman, T.Y. Hilton, Zach Pascal, with a decent tight end room as well as a really solid defense, all while leaving the team a lot of money to improve in other positions. It would cost them a little bit of draft capital, probably a second or third, but it gives them the liberty to also sign another guy as a backup like a Ryan Fitzpatrick, or, no, Josh McCown's in the league. Fitzpatrick could be a nice backup plan here, and it allows them to save their first-round pick instead of using it on a quarterback like a guy like Mac Jones, who I think would be there at that pick, and take an offensive tackle to replace Anthony Costanzo. I hope I've sold you on the Darnold to Colts experiment. It makes sense financially. It doesn't take up a ton of their cap. It leaves them room to address some of the biggest holes on their roster. It will cost minimal draft capital comparatively to where you could get a quarterback at this point. And I think it could be really, really fun to watch Sam Darnold take over with a lot of offensive talent and coaching talent around him. And hopefully he blossoms into something close to the number 2 pick that a lot of people saw him as when he came out. Drew Brees is retiring. That's it. That's the long and short. He's going to become a broadcaster. It's all but done. So on to the more interesting Saints quarterback who's going to be a free agent, Jameis Winston. I also have no idea what the hell happens here. Do I think Jameis Winston can go somewhere and be a career backup? Purely because of the fact that he has a decent amount of experience and has shown football talent despite the fact that it came at the cost of 30 touchdowns and 30 interceptions. It's very possible, but a really sick part of me. And I'm gonna say this is the landing spot as of right now because I want to make this fun. I don't want to be boring and say he'll be a backup here. I think he could go to Chicago. They have come out and said Mitch Trubisky is not going to be a Bear. They said that when they declined the 5th-year option. They brought in competition with Foles, which is a train wreck we'll get to very soon. And they've come out since the season has ended and said that Foles is going to be their guy. But the problem is that Foles and that offense were one of the worst products of football I've ever seen in my entire life. It was disgusting. It was horrible. It was rancid. It was putrid. All those negative adjectives you could describe an offense with. That's what it was when Nick Foles was the quarterback of the Bears. He went 2-5 for them in his 7 starts with 1,850 passing yards, a 10-8 touchdown to interception ratio, and he was horrific. He was barely throwing a touchdown and a third a game. In those 7 games, the Bears scored at least 20 points twice, over 20 once. They averaged 16.7 points per game, which if that was what they averaged over the whole season, which I think it could have been lower, honestly, they would have been the 2nd lowest scoring team in the entire league, only above the Jets, and that's pathetic because the Jets weren't even a real team this year. And Jameis could bring some competition to Foles the same way Foles brought some competition to Trubisky. He's mobile enough for what they like to do with rollouts and the play action type of thing. And like I've said, he has shown enough raw talent. And he's going to be looking for a prove-it deal 1 year, maybe like $10 million. I'm not really sure what he would be demanding, but I know it's going to be a lot more than the $1 million he got this year. And above all else, they cannot let Ryan Pace draft another quarterback. The Mitch Trubisky experiment failed. It was a disaster. They traded up for a guy that nobody wanted because they thought people wanted him. And one of the most interesting conflicts about that was that when John Fox was the coach, Pace was the guy rallying for Mitch, and he wanted him to draft Mitch. Fox wanted Deshaun Watson, and they still took Mitchell Trubisky over him. Do not let Pace draft another quarterback. It will not end well. He'll probably take Kyle Trask and trade up to 1 to get him. It's going to be hard to predict Winston, like I said. I wouldn't be shocked, as I said earlier, if he ends up somewhere as a backup, just a guy that they can rely on, or at least throw the ball down the field in case shit goes haywire. But I think Chicago could be an interesting position just given their weird desire to fix quarterbacks and go all in on their guys. I'm not saying Winston's one of their guys, but hey, he could be. Chicago, Jameis Winston, bring him some more misery. Fuck it. Last and not least, but pretty close to it, we're ending with my boy, the likely former New England Patriot, Cam Newton. And he is a very interesting case. On one hand, he looked great running the ball and really excelled at points in the tweaked offensive system New England ran to accommodate him and his talents and weaknesses. On the other hand, he was just flat out bad throwing the football. More interceptions than touchdowns, I believe. His mechanics looked off again. But some of that's hard to put on him because you have that offense with absolutely no weapons. I know, I watched. We just don't throw to tight ends because we don't have any. Receivers were ass if they weren't hurt. But do I think he could end up as a starter somewhere? Yes, it's possible, but I think it's unlikely at this point. There are two options I see here. Both would have him as a backup, and they are Baltimore and Washington. And I believe both of these are slightly self-explanatory, but I feel like I should still tell you my reasoning as to why I see him landing here. RG3 is going to be a free agent, and as we saw in New England, although the systems are different, Cam can thrive as a quarterback in a running-based system. I don't think Cam would do bad at all as a backup or mentor-type role for a guy like Lamar Jackson, and in case of emergency, you got to break that glass. I think Cam could do more than fine in this option-based, whole running threat type of offense they like to run. He can fire off a quick pass and he can run the hell out of the ball. We saw that in New England. I don't think that would change in Baltimore. In Washington, to me, it's more likely, but it's very close with Baltimore. And a lot of this has to do with quotes from Rivera prior to the season. The main thing stopping him from bringing in Cam Newton as the quarterback was that he wanted to see what he had in Haskins and felt that Cam Newton would stunt Haskins' development. He didn't really know that Dwayne Haskins would be the one to stunt Dwayne Haskins' development, and that experiment is now over. It crashed and burned. But that doesn't change that he really respects Cam Newton, and I see nothing from Cam that says that respect isn't mutual at this point. So I'd take a bet that the respect and relationship between these two is still there. The Taylor Heineke game we just saw makes things a little interesting because he looked damn good out there against a pretty solid defense. And again, guys that are backups can usually have one great game, but over the course of a season or even the next game, they get exposed. But still, Heineke showed enough in that game to possibly earn a second look next year. And Alex Smith's bit of a mammoth contract could prevent Cam from getting a roster spot here. But because they structured it in a way that would front load it, they could cut Alex Smith for only a $10 million dead cap hit in 2021. And that's if he doesn't decide to retire. Do I want to bank on Alex Smith retiring? No. Do I think it's impossible? Also, no. The fact that going into this playoff game, he couldn't even function enough with his calf to perform for them, to me, that's a bad sign. It's not that he didn't want to, it's that his body literally wouldn't allow him to. And as he gets older and he has more miles put up on his body, I don't know how long he can either endure that or want to endure that. So I'm not going to bank on Alex Smith retiring, but it's not out of the equation, and neither is Washington cutting him. If Smith leaves and or is cut, even if he stays, honestly, I wouldn't be shocked if Ron brings in Cam as a backup to Heineke, a third stringer behind Smith, or whoever their quarterback 1/2 are. And he could also help establish a bit of that culture. Rivera is really, really big on culture. He already let go of Darius Geese, he fucking stinks either way. And Dwayne Haskins, showing that he's not going to stand for guys that don't fit the idea of culture that he has. And Cam and him go back together, way back. We know about that, a little bit of a Super Bowl run. And there's still, in my eyes, a mutual respect between these two. So I would not be shocked at all if Cam Newton either ends up as the understudy to Lamar Jackson or ends up as a mentor, backup for Ron Rivera's team over in Washington. That's it for today, guys. Quarterback off-season talk is always fun. There were certain guys I could have included in here, like Matthew Stafford, who some people have speculated getting traded, Matt Ryan, who people have speculated getting traded, Jimmy G, who people have thought could get cut. I wanted to focus on guys who I think were much more likely to go on the move, because if I came on here and just said, I think Matthew Stafford stays in Detroit and Matt Ryan stays in Atlanta, that's not very interesting. You all probably had that preconception anyway. So I wanted to bring you a few spicier players, a few spicier opinions. I know Winston to Chicago probably won't happen, but it's way more fun to speculate as to where he could go than say, yeah, he's a backup, whatever. That's going to be it. Hopefully, as time passes and things start to play out more, we can talk about the receivers, running backs, tight ends are also very interesting this year. A lot of bigger names, a lot of talent out there that usually isn't out there in the tight end market. that'll be for a later date. Like I said, guys, peace out.